Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you exactly what Vtec is, how it works and what happens in the engine for it to work. So starting, you have a camshaft. So this is the single overhead cam Vtec. Normally on the B series, K series you will have two cams, but the principle is the same, it works exactly the same on both. Only difference is this one will only have it on the intake cam, where B series and K series will have Vtec on both intake and exhaust cams. Okay, so the first main difference is the camshaft. So if you look at the cam lobes here, you'll see you have these two. These are the exhaust cams. This being a single cam does not have VTEC on these. The two in the middle is your intake cams. So these are just your normal ones, and then you have this big one in the middle. And as you can see, it's quite a bit higher than the other one. So this part's much higher than this part. And basically what that will do is it'll open your valves quite a bit more to let in more air. So at a certain RPM, your camshaft will actually switch from running on these to running the intake on this big one, and then basically you'll make more power. It'll be easier for the engine to get more air, more power. So how that all works, it works for oil pressure. You can see there's a line that runs here. This is an oil line that the normal ones don't have. And then if you look on the side here, you have all these oil holes here. And all those holes basically line up with these holes in the solenoid. So basically oil comes in here while the solenoid is in this position. It's blocking off oil, so it's just trapping the oil here. There's a small hole here that will fill this cavity of oil as well, and this is a oil pressure switch. So the ECU will check for oil pressure here. If there's enough oil pressure coming through that little hole to fill this area up, and at a certain RPM and oil pressure level, it will tell the ECU that yes, you can engage VTEC. So this will simply trigger. This plunger will move upwards or downwards, probably down. This plunger will move and then allow oil to come in here, which in turn will allow oil to come from here and go in here. And what that will do is it'll follow this path here, come out here. Now here is the rocker assembly that sits like this. Basically you can see these are all oil passes. So oil will pass up here and it will fill this pipe. So inside this pipe it's hollow and it will fill this pipe. So this is the underside of the rockers, and here you can see you have your exhaust rockers and you have your intake rockers. And this big one in the middle is your VTEC rocker that runs on the big cam. So if you look at the cam, here's the exhausts, and then here you have your intake and your VTEC intake one. Now this being upside down, the cam runs in here and it runs on these. These ends push the valves down. So those ends are what opens the valves. So oil basically comes in here, fills this tube up, and then only when VTEC's activated. And then what happens is if you look here, you'll see inside here is a pin. See that pin move there? And on this one, there's a spring-loaded pin. So this pin can be pushed in, but it has a spring that pushes it back out again. Now if we look on this side, the other one only has a pin. So basically the oil will come in here, it will go into behind this pin, and then you'll have a lot of oil pressure behind this pin, pushing this pin outwards. That pin will push this pin, and this pin will push the spring-loaded pin, which is in this one. So this one has a spring-loaded pin, and the oil pressure will overcome the spring pressure, basically locking these two rockers on this rocker. And now we know that this rocker actually runs on the big cam, so these will actually now be all locked together and they will lift off the small cam. So these won't touch the small cam anymore, they lock to this one that runs on the big cam. So basically what happens then is you have your valves. So these are your intake ports, air goes in here. Your intake port, meaning if you look at the camshaft, you can see it has more lift, way more lift on this one than on this one. But if you look at it from the side, you can see it also starts to open sooner. So this one will start opening over here, where this one starts opening sooner, lifts it open higher, keeps it open longer, and then closes it again later. So you can get a lot more airflow into the engine when it's running on this camshaft. So I'll show you how it all goes together. So here you have the valve. On top of that you'll have a valve spring, which I'm not going to put on now because I won't be able to compress it. But you'll have the valve spring keeping the valve closed. You have the camshaft, and you have the rocker assembly. This is normally not easy to fit. So that's how it all fits together. So what happens is, you can see the cam in here. If you rotate it, it will push these down. So these will be moving up and down. You can see this pushes on top of the valve. Now there's also a lost motion assembly, which basically presses on this, uses spring and oil pressure. Uses spring and oil pressure to basically keep this, because this one is free floating while it's not doing anything while you're not in Vtec. So this will basically just keep it on its, basically keep it on the cam lobe using spring pressure and oil pressure. So there's a small hole here that will let in some oil pressure, which comes up through these holes, travels into this part, and you can see there's a hole that goes down here, and then goes into this cutout that's in here, which lines up with this small hole. So this will basically sit in here, and that will sit like that to keep this from basically just staying on the cam and not just flopping around. Basically how the oil pressure works is oil comes from the block, basically from the oil pump, and it gets pumped in here. From there it comes up this hole, which is actually the bolt hole, but the hole is much bigger than what the bolt is, so there's space around it. And then oil goes that way, there's a hole drilled in here, goes that way. Here's a small reducer to keep the oil pressure high in the bottom end and a bit low in the head, because obviously there's much more oil pressure needed in the bottom end than in the head. And then obviously some of it goes this way, but it gets trapped by the Vtec solenoid we discussed. Obviously some of that oil does come through the small hole here, there's a tiny hole here, and then basically that goes this way into the rocker assembly, which is back here. And this is basically for normal lubrication, which will also fill the other side of the tube. You see these tubes are always filled with oil to lubricate the movement of this. So if you do not have Vtec, you will not have this additional bigger lobe, you will not have this additional Vtec lobe, you will not have a Vtec solenoid, which basically sits on the back of the block here. So I pulled this end cap off just to show you guys how this works. So now you can pull these off, and you can see there's a hole here. Now of course these are pipes, so they're hollow in here, and it fills with oil, and then that hole there is basically under this. So this rides, and there's oil pressure coming out of this hole, basically lubricating the rocker on this shaft. Now on the intake side, it's the same story. See, you also have a hole there. You can pull off the rest of them. Here's the Vtec one. You see they all have holes except the Vtec one. The Vtec one does not have a hole. But if you look at the Vtec one, you have a hole in here. See in there, there's a hole. And here you have this pin. And then if you look at this, you'll see there's a big hole here that's like gapped to be bigger. So there's a massive hole here to make sure that that Vtec wall pressure gets into that, basically the Vtec lobe. This here is just a spring to keep the outer two in place. So yeah, that's basically how it works. Wall pressure comes in there. You can see how they machined this, or made it so they can actually drill through here a hole into there, and then you have the little pin. See if I can get it out. See, there's the little pin, is actuated by wall pressure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble this again, but I'm going to put this Vtec lobe in here. And the reason I'm going to do this, put the Vtec, you see this is the one from the Vtec lobe. I'm going to put it in here so I can lock these two together permanently. And this will be just so I can check the piston to valve clearance. And then I'll just disassemble this one, swap the pins around again. I can even put this one in if I want to. And then only one valve will actually be in Vtec, locked in Vtec, and that will then help me to check the piston to valve clearance. As you can see, if when I put them back here now, this is how it goes back. You can see now they are completely locked together because I swapped those two pins around, because this one is longer than that one. Of course, if you want to do this, you have to put the spacer in first, then put these in. And this is like that one I talked about, that's spring loaded. You can see this one is spring loaded, and also you can't remove this one. You probably can, but you'll probably have to punch it out from this side. So now you can see this one still moves freely, this one is locked in Vtec basically. Okay, so this is the part that the other videos normally don't show you. So this is basically exactly what Vtec does. What I've done here is, obviously this is a normal valve, it's on the normal lobe, this one is locked on Vtec. So I did this to check the valve to piston clearance. What I'm going to do now is just turn the cam so you guys can see what happens between the two valves, non-Vtec and this one's on Vtec. Okay. Okay, now see how they start opening. I don't know if you guys can see, but this one hasn't really started opening. However, this one has already started opening. So basically what that means is, not only does it open the valve more, but it also opens the valve sooner, because this one is already off the seat by 1 millimeter. However, this one is still touching the seat. Let's keep turning. See how far this one is open already? However, this one has hardly started moving. Okay, so see, this one now started moving. It's just off the seat. However, this one is already open by several millimeters. Okay, so this is basically maximum as far as it opens. So now you can see this is basically all Vtec does. It'll open both the valves like this one instead of this one. So this is normal cam profile, this is the Vtec cam profile. And as you can see, the difference is quite severe. It's quite a big difference. So even when we start closing them now, so if I keep on turning it, you guys will see that this one will start closing first again, when the Vtec valve is going to stay open for longer. Okay, it jumped a bit, but as you can see, this one already closed again it's probably about 2 millimeters off the seat, where this one is probably still about 5 millimeters off the seat. Okay, so now this one is fully closed. This one is still open, probably about 2 millimeters still. Keep on turning it. And now both is fully closed. So yeah, that's what it does. Opens its way, opens. That's what it does, opens. Okay, so I have them open again at full, full open, full Vtec, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to use this small caliper that could be mistaken for a children's toy, just to measure how much further the Vtec valve opens compared to the normal valve. Now I can't measure it to the seat exactly, so I'm going to measure it just to the head. So this won't be the exact amount it opens, but it will tell us how much more it opens than the other one. So if we look here, it opens almost 10 millimeters, about 9.6 I would say. Opens about 9.6 from the valve to the head. Now if we go to the normal one, okay, this thing is not working. So if you look at the normal one only opens about 6.3, 6.4. So yeah, that's quite a lot less. I would have never thought that, even knowing this Vtec stuff, that it opens it that much more. Anyway, so as we discussed, you can see you have your oil coming in from here. It goes through the filter in there, it goes down to the rods and crank, it comes up. It travels in this tube, and then it comes to this Vtec solenoid. So the Vtec solenoid is this thing, and it bolts on here. So it bolts. So the Vtec solenoid is this thing, and it bolts onto the engine. Yeah, and this controls basically Vtec. You have this oil pressure sensor, which the ECU looks at, and if there's not enough oil pressure, Vtec will not engage. This is the solenoid itself, triggered electronically by the ECU, and it sits on top like this. Now I took it apart so we can have a look at this. But yeah, basically you'll have pressurized oil coming in here, and then it's blocked off by it will be blocked off in this chamber by the solenoid. So you'll see there's a shaft in here, but it's blocked off. Only oil that can come through is that small hole in the middle there. Okay, so let's quickly look at the solenoid. So it normally sits like this. And this bolts on there. Oil pressure comes in here, and basically you can see there's a hole there, and that hole goes up to here where the solenoid sits. So the solenoid is electronically triggered, and it is closed if it's not triggered. So at the moment, this will just sit here and have oil pressure in this chamber and in this little oil valley here. Once Vtec is triggered by the ECU, this thing electronically opens using this signal coming through this plug from the ECU, and then oil goes in there and comes out of here, and that oil then comes onto this section here, and there's a hole in this little, I don't know what you would call this thing, but basically oil pressure comes in here, and you can see this is closed at the moment. It's locked closed, but once oil pressure comes in there, it'll push this down. It'll use the oil pressure to push this rod down. So now you can see there's a rod in here. Once I push on it with my finger at the top here, you can see now it's moving. Okay, you can't really see it, but I can't push it far enough, so let me get a screwdriver. Yeah, see how this opens and closes? So the oil pressure will basically push this down, and then the oil pressure that's in this chamber will be able to flow to that chamber, which will result in basically the oil coming from the oil pump sitting in this chamber is now passed through in volume to this chamber, which obviously then fills this tube the rockers run on, and it engages those pins to engage Vtec. So that's basically it. It's very simple. I'll take it apart just to show you guys. I mean, it's literally just a rod with a spring at the bottom, and it sits in this hole with the various chambers. Now this chamber at the bottom is, if anything leaks in here, it'll enter this chamber and simply leak back into the head. Now, it won't leak back, it'll be passed back into the head to drain back to the sump. Same with the top. There's 3 holes here. At the top, a small one, 2 bigger ones, and you can see they do come out on the inside. There you can see one and the small one. And basically this is also just any oil that ends up leaking through this piston, because this is a very tight fit, but it's obviously not 100% sealed. So anything that leaked past where the solenoid triggers it leaks into this chamber, and let me show you guys where that ends up. So the bottom one, it will leak in here, and that's very simple. Travels in this tube, goes up, and if you can see in there, let me turn on the flash, there's a little hole there, right there. So it'll simply come back into this area of the head and basically leak out here and drain back down to the sump. Very much the same with the top one. Anything that leaks in there, you can see right through. It will enter here and come out there, and then simply just fill this up and leak back into the oil drain that goes back down to the block, which is right there, down to the sump, not the block. So yeah, this is basically a video showing in depth how Vtec works, exactly the oiling system, the valves, what happens, why it happens. Mostly people will have graphs when they make these kind of videos, but I decided I wanted to actually know exactly what happens and, you know, why it works, what it does. I've never seen anyone else on YouTube actually showing what the valves does like I did, so that's why I decided to make this video. Now the double overhead cam, obviously the B series, works very much the same. Only difference is, instead of one, because the single cam only have Vtec on the intake, because there's only space for lobes on the cam for the intake. The B series with the double overhead cam will have the same principle, exactly the same. Only difference is normally the cams run on top and these rocker arms run at the bottom, and you will have, instead of one tube filling with oil, you'll have both of them filling, and you'll have Vtec both intake and exhaust. If anyone's interested in me making that video, I do have a B series engine that I can make the same video on. However, I'm sure this will suffice, but if anyone wants that video, comment down below. Please like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, so everyone can know exactly what Vtec is.